Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is January 11th, 2026. Today's news cycle is, well, it's not just chaotic. What we're witnessing marks, I think, the definitive end of post-Cold War diplomatic pretense.
It really does.
The military operation that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, it's a complete game changer. It establishes a new, very overt doctrine of unilateral force across the globe.
It's a shift from, sanctions and covert pressure, which we've seen for decades,
Right.
to full-spectrum physical intervention. And the precedents this sets for relations with NATO, Russia, China, even its own constitution, are catastrophic.
This really feels like a pivotal moment. This is the moment when imperialism, you could say, just stopped wearing a disguise.
And what we're witnessing is the acceleration of a trend that's been simmering for years. It's now fully unleashed. It's operating without any pretense of international law.
And then all.
The operation in Venezuela wasn't just a simple foreign policy shift. It was a fundamental declaration that the established rules, the treaty obligations that form the bedrock of global stability, are now just inconvenient suggestions.
Things to be discarded at will.
At the whim of executive power. And that unilateral action, it affects every alliance and every adversary all at once.
Okay, let's unpack this with the facts. Let's start with the headline event everyone is talking about. The capture, the kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro.
A stunning operation.
It was a stunning feat of special operations. But we have to stress a vital detail that's often missed in the immediate chaos.
Which is?
The U.S. did not achieve actual regime change. This is a decapitation strike, but the body of the state, it remains functional.
Exactly. That is the key point. Key government figures are still in power. We're talking about Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, Diosdado Cabello, who is still a massively influential figure in the Constituent Assembly and the military.
And the defense minister too, right?
Pedrino Lopez, yes. The objective was the physical removal of one man. It was not the eradication of Chavismo, that socialist ideology that has dominated their politics for over 2 decades.
So the failure to achieve actual regime change, that immediately undermines the entire strategic value of the operation.
It does, and it creates a massive constitutional crisis right here at home.
And that crisis is rooted in the rule of law we supposedly uphold. According to the analysis from Scott Ritter, this operation fundamentally violates the U.S. Constitution itself. How does a foreign operation do that?
It's all about treaty law.
Yeah.
The U.S. Constitution recognizes treaties under Article 6, Clause 2 as the supreme law of the land.
Okay.
The U.S. is a signatory to the UN Charter. That charter strictly forbids the capture or, targeted assassination of the heads of sovereign nations. So by proceeding with this, regardless of those obligations, the executive branch just bypasses the law.
So Ritter argues this transforms the United States into what?
Into a functioning dictatorship of the worst kind. When the executive can just unilaterally ignore treaty law and wage undeclared war, which Congress has. I mean, it has essentially abrogated its core responsibilities.
And the state starts to resemble something else entirely.
A Caligula-like narcissistic cult of personality operating purely on impulse. That's his phrasing.
That is a critical nuance.
Yeah.
The legal foundation is just gone. It's replaced by unilateral action driven by, it seems, personal interest.
Absolutely.
So let's debate the pretext versus the reality for the strike. The official justification that was trotted out was the highest one of all: national security.
Of course.
Combating drugs, terrorism, keeping America safe from transnational threats originating in Venezuela.
And the rebuttal to that is immediate and devastatingly factual. Senator Rand Paul pointed out explicitly that whatever issues Venezuela has, no fentanyl is coming from there.
So the source of America's current opioid crisis is not Venezuela.
Not at all. There might be some regional cocaine traffic, sure, but to frame this as an existential threat requiring an act of war and a kidnapping is, it's highly misleading.
Colonel Douglas McGregor, he dismissed all the high-minded rhetoric too, right? Human rights, freedom, democracy.
He called it outright nonsense.
And McGregor's analysis puts this into a longer historical context.
Precisely. He noted that U.S. interventionism, it goes all the way back to World War I. At that time, the rhetoric was about making the world safe for democracy.
The reality was different.
The reality was protecting the interests of the banking community. It was about preventing the loss of invested capital in France and Britain. It was an economic decision, but it was disguised as a moral crusade.
And today, that economic motivation is just less disguised.
Much less.
Which brings us to the hidden truth, which multiple sources confirm is purely about resource extraction. We've had former administration officials who were strikingly clear. Trump put it out there in the open years ago, declaring, "We want the oil."
It's the oldest form of imperialism, stripped of all the modern political veneers. It's justified not as policy, but as appetite.
And when you analyze the financial component, that corporate coup that paved the way for the strike, the oil motive becomes undeniable.
It's undeniable. And this is where Anya Parampil's detailed analysis on the sabotage of Citgo becomes absolutely indispensable.
For our listeners who may not know, what is Citgo?
Citgo is Venezuela's massive U.S.-based refiner. And it's vital because it specializes in processing Venezuela's unique, heavy, sour crude. That kind of oil requires very complex refining infrastructure.
Okay, so let's detail that corporate maneuvering. Citgo was historically shielded by a really complex, multi-layered corporate structure.
Yes, and that structure was designed specifically to protect the asset from litigation, from political seizure.
How did it work?
Think of it like a set of nested Russian dolls, each one protecting the core asset. The Venezuelan state, through the president, appointed the board of PDVSA, the state oil company. PDVSA then appointed the PDVSA holding board. That holding board appointed the Citgo holding board, which finally appointed the Citgo petroleum board. That structure was the legal liability shield.
And that shield was deliberately dismantled. How did that mechanism work?
The corporate coup was incredibly swift. In February 2019, immediately after Juan Guaido was recognized by the U.S. as the quote-unquote legitimate interim leader.
Which was a purely diplomatic act of recognition.
Purely diplomatic. He then directly appointed a new board of Citgo Petroleum.
Wait, he just appointed them. He skipped the entire established chain of command.
He skipped every layer, and by doing that, he completely breached the corporate separation. The action was designed specifically to make the asset vulnerable to creditors who had lawsuits against the Venezuelan state.
So a corporate coup, enabled by diplomatic recognition, opens the door for creditors. What's the most stunning example of this conflict of interest?
It all centers on a legal conflict with a company called Crystalex.
Crystalex.
They were suing Venezuela in the IXID court, that's the World Bank's investment dispute court, seeking payment for previous expropriations. The U.S. recognition of Guaido enabled them to go after Citgo's assets.
And this is where it gets really murky.
This is where it's breathtaking. Guaido appointed a man named Jose Ignacio Hernandez as the Attorney General, tasked with representing Venezuela's interests against Crystalex. But Hernandez had previously worked for Crystalex.
Wait. The lawyer supposed to be defending Venezuela from Crystalex was a former employee of Crystalex.
It goes so much further than that. He wasn't just a former lawyer. He was actively representing the very entity whose interests were diametrically opposed to the state he was supposed to defend.
So he was appointed to argue against the corporate shield that he himself helped to dismantle.
It is a direct, unambiguous conflict of interest. It enabled the corporate coup, moving billions of dollars of refining assets into the hands of U.S.-backed creditors. It basically turns the entire foreign policy intervention into a collection agency operation.
That is a critical piece of the puzzle. It establishes the financial motive before a single shot was fired. Let's turn now to the dark operational details of Maduro's capture.
Yes.
Scott Ritter confirmed this was unequivocally a direct act of war, not a legitimate arrest. And roughly 100 people died, including staff, civilians caught in the crossfire.
The human cost of a decapitation strike really underscores its seriousness, and the operation included reports of some very advanced non-conventional capabilities.
The secret weapon.
Exactly. According to initial reports, U.S. forces used a secret weapon that caused Maduro's security personnel to suffer from severe nosebleeds and vomit blood during the raid. It just crippled their ability to defend the complex.
That points to something highly specialized. We're not talking about conventional small arms fire here.
Not at all. Experts are speculating this could be related to advanced directed energy weapons or maybe high-power sonic weapons designed to incapacitate people without leaving, bullet holes or shrapnel.
The fact that a security detail was crippled by sudden, systemic physical distress points to something very focused.
Very focused, very advanced technology to ensure absolute clearance for the Special Forces team.
And here's where we get into a critical nuance about U.S. military capability, something Colonel Douglas McGregor noted. He pointed out that the administration, and Trump specifically, thinks this successful special ops mission reflects overwhelming, large-scale military power.
But that view is dangerously detached from the reality of, as he puts it, real, honest-to-God war.
How so?
McGregor's caution is vital here. Special Operations Forces, SOF, they are fragile entities in a conventional battlefield. They only succeed if you can guarantee two things: perfect intelligence and absolute clearance through the area of operation.
Which means no interference, no sophisticated detection systems.
Certainly no air or missile defense capabilities aimed at them.
So a successful night raid on a lightly defended compound is fundamentally different from invading a nation-state defended by modern weaponry.
Entirely different. In a real conflict, logistics are king. You need fuel, you need air cover, you need resilience against electronic warfare, the ability to operate under fire for days, weeks.
And McGregor had a chilling example.
He did. He pointed to Ukraine. He said if the special operations helicopters used in raids like the one in Venezuela were flown across the Ukrainian battlefield, where Russian integrated air defense systems are active, he believes, and I'm quoting, nobody would have ever been seen again.
Wow.
The administration is fundamentally confusing surgical decapitation, which relies on surprise and specific vulnerabilities, with strategic military dominance. And that confusion can lead to catastrophic strategic overreach.
Let's talk about those global repercussions now, because this unilateral doctrine established in Caracas, it immediately sent shockwaves everywhere, especially to U.S. allies in Europe and NATO. Let's start with the European paradox, as noted by Glenn Deason. He argues Europe is scared to death, dead serious, that Russia might attack them, yet they're pursuing no war economy, no mass mobilization.
It is a stunning contradiction, and it highlights the fragility of the alliance. If a threat is truly existential, a nation mobilizes. It shifts its economy, it prepares its population. Europe has done none of this.
And this fear of Russia paralyzes them.
It paralyzes them from condemning U.S. lawlessness, even when the U.S. is acting like a rogue state. That silence over Venezuela is something Pepe Escobar called slavish behavior.
But the implications for NATO are really profound when you consider the next logical step in this unilateral expansionism.
The scenario of the U.S. invading Greenland, that is the ultimate test and the potential end of NATO unity.
Because Greenland is Danish territory.
And Denmark is a founding member of NATO. If the U.S., a NATO member, invades a fellow member's territory, that signals the complete functional disintegration of the alliance.
Escobar suggests it would be a fitting end.
A fitting end to a thoroughly malignant organization, creating an internal conflict where the European are rump fighting the American fundament. The internal corrosion of trust, driven by U.S. unilateralism, is becoming an existential threat to the organization itself.
Shifting over to Russia, Andrei Tsygankov argues that the conflict we are seeing is far deeper than just recent policies about Ukraine. He traces the tension back to Western attitudes since the mid-2000s.
This is critical for understanding the Russian perspective. Tsygankov emphasizes that Russians see NATO expansion not as democracy promotion, which is the stated intent. They see it as a profound insult.
An insult how?
As a promotion of Western civilizational and corporate economic interests, often at the expense of Russia's own institutions and stability. The underlying message they perceive is, if you don't do what we say, your governance is illegitimate, you are an autocracy, and therefore you are not sustainable. That perception of external coercive transformation is what fuels their geopolitical pushback.
And Russia has just offered a massive military reality check to the West, the Oreshnik missile revelation. They launched 2 undefendable Oreshnik missiles.
Traveled so fast nobody could even see them coming in.
This is a definitive capability shift, a game changer in the war in the sky. Why is it undefendable?
These are hypersonic glide vehicles. We're talking about speeds exceeding Mach 9.
Mach 9.
Which means they move faster than any existing terminal defense system can acquire, track, and intercept. And unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow a predictable arc,
parabola,
right? These vehicles are highly maneuverable in the atmosphere. Their speed and their maneuverability defeat existing radar and missile defense systems.
So all of our current platforms are basically useless against this.
No radar or anti-missile defense platform currently deployed by the U.S. or NATO has a reliable capability against them. The missiles didn't carry a nuclear warhead this time, but the capability demonstrates that U.S. and NATO air defenses are effectively irrelevant against modern Russian technology.
This fundamentally alters the strategic calculus.
Completely. It gives Russia an undeniable advantage in conventional strategic deterrence. The whole concept of U.S. strategic dominance is quite literally being outpaced.
Despite this obvious military capability, we have to look at Putin's stated objectives. Daniel Davis's analysis suggests he's focused on much more limited, pragmatic goals than the Western narrative assumes.
Davis argues that Putin isn't seeking to conquer or reestablish the entire Soviet Union. He's focused on providing concrete security on his western border and ensuring economic stability.
A pragmatic reality that is constantly ignored.
Constantly. Ignored by key U.S. advisors like Keith Kellogg, who famously compared the Ukrainian President Zelensky to Abraham Lincoln when briefing Trump. It shows a deep disconnect between the military analysis of what Russia can do and the political framing of what Russia wants to do.
And that contradiction is dangerous.
Very. If advisors simultaneously claim Putin is too weak to win and yet desperate to conquer half of Europe, the policy response will inevitably be flawed and likely escalatory.
The economic warfare is escalating just as aggressively. The U.S. is now engaging in what's being called modern-day piracy.
Seizing Russian-flagged oil tankers in international waters, specifically near Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean.
A blatant violation of maritime law.
It's state piracy. We are talking about vessels like the Ulina and the Marinera. These ships were part of the Shadow Fleet, an armada of older, unmarked tankers used to evade U.S. sanctions.
So they allow oil commerce to continue outside the Western financial system.
And seizing them is a direct attack on that financial architecture designed to circumvent U.S. control.
And legislatively, Senator Lindsey Graham is trying to weaponize trade even further.
He's pushing legislation for 500% tariffs on countries like China, India, and Brazil if they keep purchasing discounted Russian energy. He's aiming to cut off Moscow's revenue stream entirely.
But this aggressive, unilateral financial coercion, it raises a critical question about the future of global finance, doesn't it?
It does. And the massive unintended consequence is that this only accelerates de-dollarization. It pushes countries like the BRICS nations and key partners like Saudi Arabia and India to find alternatives.
They're seeking refuge from the U.S., weaponizing the international financial system.
Exactly. The more aggressively the U.S. acts to enforce sanctions or seize assets, the weaker the global trust in the dollar becomes. They are trading short-term financial leverage for long-term currency suicide.
So the Venezuelan precedent, seizing an asset like Citgo, then seizing ships, it's a clear warning to every nation.
It's a warning that says, if you use the U.S. financial system or rely on international maritime law, you are subject to immediate confiscation if your interests conflict with Washington's. It incentivizes the creation of parallel, non-dollar-based trade systems.
And this unilateral doctrine is already expanding. We have the immediate specific threat of a military strike against Iran. Reports that Trump is preparing and ready for missile strikes against Iran.
And the justification is his claimed inability to stand to see the treatment of violent protesters.
The irony is just staggering.
It is. This aggressive posturing over human rights abroad in Iran stands in stark contrast to his resolute backing of the cold-blooded murder of Renee Good in Minneapolis by an IC agent.
A young woman shot 3 times in the face as she tried to flee. The application of moral outrage is purely selective.
Purely convenient for foreign intervention. And this pattern, it aligns perfectly with the established color revolution script we've seen so many times.
What is that script?
First, protests begin, often driven by real economic grievances. Second, those protests turn violent. Third, security forces regain control. Fourth, Western media claims of massacres proliferate, even if they're unsubstantiated.
And finally, military intervention is floated as the only option.
To override the political leadership that has regained control, it's a playbook.
And we have evidence of external sponsorship for the instability in Iran.
Explicitly. The Jerusalem Post reported that Mossad posted messages in Farsi urging demonstrators to act, stating that they were with them in the streets. It confirms an external hand in escalating what might have been manageable domestic issues.
What's really notable here is the lack of any attempt to go to the UN Security Council.
That's a key feature. Even for symbolic reasons, previous interventions in Iraq, Libya, Syria, they had that veneer of international law. This is a complete abandonment of it.
But this naked power move, it signals decline, not strength.
Right, because it alienates the world community. It pushes the multipolar shift forward at record speed, and the consequences are immediate. Iran has warned that its missiles are locked on U.S. targets if a strike occurs.
Closer to home, the economic collapse strategy from Venezuela is being used against Cuba. The blockade on Venezuelan oil, which was Cuba's main income source, has brought the island to the brink of collapse.
We're seeing devastating 18-hour daily blackouts. This is economic warfare designed to produce a regime collapse through a manufactured humanitarian crisis.
And we saw Senator Lindsey Graham celebrating this publicly.
Celebrating, saying Cuba is ready to fall and that great Cuban Americans would be happy.
But there's a profound, almost inevitable short-sightedness to this strategy, isn't there, given the geography?
Absolutely. The irony is unavoidable. A complete Cuban collapse would immediately trigger a massive migration crisis, a boat lift situation right off the coast of Florida.
Overwhelming the very border resources this administration claims to be protecting.
They're using economic tools abroad to create the exact large-scale humanitarian and migration crisis they claim to be fighting at home.
Now for the most outrageous global threat, one that takes this doctrine to war with a U.S. ally. The Greenland annexation threat.
Truly astonishing.
Reports that Trump has kept the military option on the table for Greenland, instructed the Pentagon to prepare an invasion plan, and the justification. Russia or China will take over Greenland if the U.S. doesn't.
A geopolitical fantasy straight from the 19th century. Senator Chris Murphy immediately and correctly stated, this is the United States going to war with NATO.
Because Greenland is a sovereign part of the Kingdom of Denmark?
A NATO member. And the NATO treaty requires mutual defense if a member is attacked under Article 5. So an invasion plan against Greenland is an invasion plan against NATO. It destabilizes the entire Western defensive alliance.
What's the military logic here?
The purported logic, as noted by Pepe Escobar, is that an annexation would give the U.S. a strategic power position. An ice-free port, a massive landmass, directly challenging Russia in the Arctic.
But the cost is the destruction of the alliance system.
The very system the U.S. supposedly leads. And the same aggressive logic has led to floating the idea of invading Canada, dubbed the Don Roe Doctrine. It's a total abandonment of modern diplomacy for raw territorial ambition.
And amidst all of this profound tension, we have the bizarre spectacle of the Nobel Peace Prize obsession.
Oh, this is incredible.
Maria Corina Machado, a leading Venezuelan opposition figure, promised to give or share her Nobel Prize with Trump if she could get a meeting with him.
And Trump openly stated he couldn't think of anyone who deserved it more than himself, listing his actions, like settling 8 wars, as justification. He told the public she was coming to pay her regards to our country, really, to me.
It showcases the profound narcissism driving foreign policy.
It's all personal vanity over diplomatic stability. And the reaction from the institution was immediate public humiliation.
The Nobel Committee issued a public statement.
A very public statement saying the prize cannot be revoked, divided, or transferred to another person once announced. It was designed to humiliate Trump, and it compounded his existing anger toward Norway. It just underscores that the focus has shifted from policy achievement to managing the ego of the executive.
This unilateral aggression abroad finds its mirror image in the domestic operation of the state. We started by noting the contradiction between criticizing human rights abroad while supporting violence at home.
Yes.
Let's focus on the ICE killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis. An ICE agent fired 3 bullets into her face as she drove away from a school.
The facts are horrifying. A young woman fleeing the scene shot multiple times in the face. Yet Trump and administration officials like Kristi Noem, they rushed to judgment. They called the victim a domestic terrorist and claimed the vehicle was weaponized.
A preemptive condemnation designed to protect the agent.
At all costs, to establish a justification for lethal force.
But witness accounts directly contradicted that official narrative.
Witnesses confirmed she was definitively trying to just get out of there. It directly contradicts the claim the vehicle was weaponized or that the agent was under immediate threat. This highlights the danger of law enforcement operating under different rules.
Especially federal ICE agents.
Right.
Running around masked, creating chaos.
And acting with impunity. The Department of Justice is actively trying to ice out state prosecutors from even investigating the case. They're trying to assume federal jurisdiction to protect your agent.
But there's a predicted legal backfire to that strategy.
And this is where the intricacies of U.S. law actually offer a path to justice. Federal prosecutors predict that Trump and Noem's desperation to protect their agent will ironically help state officials in Minnesota successfully investigate and prosecute.
How?
The core principle is jurisdiction. If the agent is tried at the state level, which Minnesota is fighting for, any conviction would be presidential pardon proof. A president can only pardon federal crimes.
So the attempt to cover up or justify the killing by the federal administration is actually solidifying the state's case.
Exactly. Their attempts at a cover-up create the strongest possible case against the agent by proving federal interference and a concerted effort to obstruct justice. It adds a powerful layer of evidence for state prosecutors.
This whole domestic environment reflects the corrosion of the leadership itself. You frequently contrast Trump, the impulsive narcissist, with the organized danger behind him.
The ideologues, the donors, the corporate interests exploiting the instability. Trump is the accelerant, the chaos engine whose ego must be constantly fed. He is not a helpless figurehead, but his self-aggrandizement is the primary driver the ideologues exploit.
And Stephen Miller is a perfect example of that organized danger.
A perfect example. Miller is currently accused of insider trading and defrauding the United States government out of millions of dollars.
How specifically was he profiting from the policies he was helping create?
He was allegedly profiting personally from ICE operations by holding stock in key contractors, specifically Palantir, while living in rent-free government housing, a massive conflict of interest.
And his DHS, led by Kristi Noem, spent huge amounts on taxpayer-funded TV ads promoting border security.
Over $200 million, and the most stunning detail about that ad spend was the targeting.
It was pure sycophancy.
Of that $200 million, $30,000 was spent specifically to run the ads in the Mar-a-Lago market, just to ensure the dear leader saw the promotion and felt validated. The entire apparatus is designed to channel taxpayer money to corporate cronies or use government funds for narcissistic validation.
And this corruption is also fundamentally feeding the military-industrial complex, even while the executive claims to criticize it.
Yes, Trump demanded the military budget increase from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion for a dream military, while at the same time criticizing defense contractors like Raytheon for engaging in massive stock buybacks instead of increasing production.
No, the money doesn't solve the problem.
What's critical to understand is that throwing another $500 billion at the budget does not resolve production capacity issues. It doesn't build missiles or shells faster. Instead, that money goes straight into defense contractor pockets, rewarding shareholders through stock buybacks, and sustaining the economic bubble.
The money doesn't make the military stronger, it makes the defense industry richer.
And the entire political and institutional environment has been turned into a loyalty test, where strategic competence is entirely secondary. Incompetence is survivable, as long as there is sufficient cruelty and unquestioning loyalty to Trump's personal whims.
It's a system where the pursuit of power and profit just overrides constitutional duty and strategic logic at every single level. So, to sum up, we have analyzed this unprecedented level of unilateral military and financial aggression, from the corporate coup and decapitation strike in Venezuela, the seizure of international assets, to missile threats against Iran and the outrageous proposition of annexing Greenland, potentially starting a war with NATO. And domestically, this same doctrine of impunity is reflected in the violence granted to agents of the state, like in the killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis, all against a backdrop of stunning corporate corruption.
The one thing you must remember is that the U.S. empire is now waging a desperate, self-destructive campaign defined by overt lawlessness. This aggression, whether it's abroad in Caracas, in the seas, seizing international tankers, or domestically in Minneapolis, it is the core symptom of a system prioritizing the financial and narcissistic interests of its elite over constitutional law and global stability. The world is reacting. The rise of undefendable hypersonic missiles, the global collapse of financial reliance on the dollar, the fracturing of NATO, and the repercussions, they're irreversible. The era of diplomatic pretense is definitively over, replaced by a raw, transactional form of unilateral power projection.
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.